Sega.
Ja, hallo, wir sind heute hier bei Sega und schauen uns Fall of Samurai an, ein Standalone Add-on zu Shogun 2. So, please introduce yourself.
I'm Al Bickham. I'm Communications Manager for the Creative Assembly.
Alright, tell us something about the new features of Fall of Samurai.
So, Shogun 2, Fall of the Samurai, is a very large standalone expansion to Shogun 2. So some of the new features are, it's a much more modern period set 300 years later. So we have the weapons and the technology that are reflected, in that period. So you'll see much more focus on rifle fire. From the very start, you'll have access to cannons, and ultimately you'll unlock the Gatling-Gun as a technology, which is a fairly brutal kind of machine gun on the battlefield. The feeling is much more impactful, much more about this gunpowder era. We have navies, for example. Their function has changed slightly. They have more tactical options now. You can use your navies to bombard the land.
On a basic standpoint, because I think a lot of people know samurai and those kind of things. So how do you kind of balance it? Because I think it's samurai were more or less like wiped out at the beginning. So how does this change? Because I think a lot of readers would know it's like, I think the British supplied heavily Japan, and Japan was overpowered more or less, and the samurai had to change their way of thinking how to go into war, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so at the very start you have access to sort of very basic units, and initially, because this battle is the Boshin War, the War of the Year of the Dragon, is a conflict between the two ideologies in the country: the pro-shogunate forces who want to keep the shogun on the throne, and the imperial forces who want to change the face of Japan and put an emperor in his place. And these are the guys who obviously ultimately won. Both sides realise this is an arms race, so quite quickly you see the reduction of the traditional ways of war that are more melee based. Bow are put down in favour of rifles very, very quickly. And both factions have access to this technology because they're both trading with the West. They're both importing weapons. They're both importing ideas and techniques which modernise warfare. So you'll see an arms race between these two. You can still field samurai, and you can actually build production centres in your cities which will train samurai. But as you modernise, you'll notice that their abilities are slightly reduced over time.
And how would you say is the gameplay style changing? Is it a bit like, would you compare it to Empire Total War more?
It's more about ranged combat than Shogun 2. It's a much more modern period. There are many more bullets flying around in the air and cannonballs and things. So it's while there is still a very, very important place for melee combat, this is the gunpowder era. This is the era of the shell and the percussion cap and the cannonball. So you'll notice there's a lot more focus on ranged combat than melee combat. But melee combat does still play a key part. I mean, units such as the saber cavalry, who are these guys look like Civil War guys. They wear tunics with buttons, caps, and they have sabers and pistols. And these guys, you're going to need these guys. They'll perform really, really key functions. You need to take out field guns, and to do that you'll have to manoeuvre very carefully and do some pretty clever outflanking manoeuvres. But those cannons, as you know from Total War games previously, are susceptible to melee strikes, and they'll go down pretty quickly. They've got quite small crews. And that's one very valid way to take out those guns, but you have to use terrain and you have to be careful and don't charge in the front of them.
I kind of like that idea of having not an airstrike, but a bombardment more or less on the field.
That's
right.
right.
How's that working?
So one of the new functions of navies, now these navies the navies in the game are made up of very modern ships, ironclads, these squat metal boxes on the water, bristling with cannons. Now these cannons have quite a long range, and you'll notice that in the naval battles, you'll notice that the range is increased somewhat. But on the campaign map, if you have a fleet or a ship, a cannon-bearing ship, within range of a land battle that's about to ensue, when you dive into that land battle and you start the battle, you'll see a new ability on the right-hand side of the screen, which is to call in a bombardment from your navies. Now you can call this, enormous explosive rain of shells down, but it's not a super weapon. It's important to note that this isn't an automatic game winner. In siege battles and land battles, if you call in an artillery strike, it takes time to come in, and it's not always the most accurate thing. They didn't have sophisticated targeting technologies in these days. They went, we need to shoot over there, and they shot over there, and they gave them some basic coordinates, and there they were.
So they can also more or less like shoot your own guys, or? Yeah,
there's a risk of friendly fire, of course. Yeah. As there always is with these big strikes. So you really, with very careful strategic use of ships, you can really slow down your enemy's production and their income by bombarding their cities. So navies really have a new function. I mean, already, since the Empire days, we've had navies that could transport troops and do battle with other navies, but now they have this third function.
It's more like now it's much more important than in Shogun 2, because I think in Shogun 2 it was like, you had naval battles but they were not as important as an empire.
Well, I don't know about important. I think the style was very different. I mean, I think the naval battles, I think to some people may have seemed less impactful in Shogun 2, because they didn't have big cannons and they weren't blowing chunks off each other like that. I mean, you had boarding actions and some other interesting mechanics, but the naval battles here are obviously much more impactful and explosive, and you get a good strike on a ship and it hits the magazine. You'll see a big explosion. You'll see that ship can split in two and explode in another, like a ball of fireworks, and sink in two parts. It's a much more modern and devastating, impactful kind of combat. So.
I think I talked about what was about diplomacy. So how much, what kind of things can I do to attract the British or the American to help me? So is it just about money, or is it because I think it was more or less in the historical days more about that the British Empire wants to gain control in Japan and stuff like that?
Well, we don't have the Western. There's three Western powers in the game: America, Great Britain, and France, and primarily they're trade partners. And that was a key drive for the Western powers, was to unlock the potential of Japan and find new riches there and new luxuries. I mean, we have green tea now. This is we trade with Japan for this. So that's the primary focus of the Western powers in the game. They're chiefly trade partners. Now you can build. There are key ports in the game that you can, if you capture these, you can build a specific trading centre for that nation, because it will have a specific trade route to London or Le Havre in France or San Francisco in the US. Now you build good relations with the Western powers, and you'll start unlocking access to technologies that you can buy directly off them. So troop types, for example, there's you trade with you're on good terms with the British, and you can hire Royal Marines, who are obviously very drilled, very experienced, trained infantrymen. And for example, there's a series of conditions you need to meet, but if you push that relationship you have with the British, once you have the British trade port and your relationships are very good with them, you'll be presented with a certain dilemma. The certain outcome of that dilemma enables you to buy the HMS Warrior, which is a unique ship in the game, a super big metal-clad ship with 40 cannons in it, which dominates naval battles. As a late-game technology, it's it's quite dominating in naval battles, like I said. Geographical areas where you can build railways. So you can't build a crazy spaghetti network all over the country. The potential areas where you can build railway stations, which then obviously link together with track to make the railway, they sort of go right across from west to east, but the central part of the country. And there's another line that can be built north. So this creates a kind of nervous system for the country, you know, through which your troops can be passed at great speed to other territories. So you're resupplying that kind of mid to late game when you're conquering, you know, from one side to the other, the territories of Japan. You can really increase your troop movement, you know, quite very rapidly. And say, you know, I have a particular production centre at one end of the line, say producing Armstrong guns, you know, big wheel cannons. And my war effort needs to be at the other end of the map, then I can very quickly resupply my armies that are moving up there with fresh cannon, you know, within a couple of turns. So likewise, agents can be placed on trains to dart around the map and perform their very sneaky functions.
All right, cool. So yeah, why should I buy it if I already own Shogun 2 and Empire and so that? What much can I get?
So the experience is the most modern war that we've tackled at the Creative Assembly, the Total War. There's technologies in this game that that aren't in those games because they were of earlier periods, even Empire and Napoleon, earlier period. You know, it has a thoroughly modern flavour, but also it charts development in a way we haven't really tackled in the Creative Assembly before with Total War. So you'll see this development in the campaign map. As you run through a campaign, you'll see changes, and which at first appear subtle, but then if you looked at the map at the beginning of the campaign game and then at the end of the campaign game, the changes are quite remarkable. You'll see, by the end, you have factories everywhere spewing smoke into the sky, you have railway networks with trains chugging along the map, left and right, telegraph poles appearing. The music changes. Like at the beginning, it's that much more traditional Japanese string music, very simple and pure. But as the game progresses, you'll hear more Western influence in the music, more orchestral, more different instruments, more Western oriented instruments. So the whole flavour of the game changes as you go along. There's a great sense of development, which I think, in a way that we haven't really done in a Total War game before. So,
do you have any plans for other Total War games? Because I think the world really needs a new Rome.
Yeah, a lot of people say that.
Yeah,
and, yeah.
I mean,
and we hear that. Believe me, we hear that.
Facebook,
Yeah. No, we at the moment we're at one of those kind of crucial planning stages. Where do we go next? We have desire from various parts of the community and a lot of noise from various parts of the community to revisit previous games. Likewise, we have the whole of history to choose from, and there's a lot of stuff that we talk about quite a lot that we haven't tackled yet. So, we're at a fairly crucial decision-making point, and I don't think it'll be too long before we start talking about, or at least we make a decision about where we're going next. So watch the space.
All right, cool. Then thanks.
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You're right.